Welcome. MONIKA. It's Gendai, and it's made of Petrina and Marsya Maharani. And yeah, just thanks for being here and thanks for doing this. And it's all yours.
Thank you for having us. We're really excited to kind of get started and to develop our relationship with open source. And we're especially really excited to have you all here to chat with us about arts work and governance and labor conditions of arts work. It's part of our ongoing research as Gendai. So we thought that we would start by introducing ourselves and give a little bit of background information on Gendai. I'm gonna pop some links into the chat here. You'll see our website, our Instagram, and our email address, and a link to our project brief of the two projects that we're going to be discussing. So you can follow along there if you like, but there's a lot of information in the brief, so don't don't force yourself to read each word carefully.
We're gonna go through them anyway, but yeah, we're happy to be here. Thank you for having us. We wanted to show some photos from Gendai's past projects, but also keeping in mind that we are the new stewards taking over Gendai as of early this year. And we'll share some slides also to talk about the two projects that we're developing. Yeah. I'll start.
Let's introduce ourselves.
Yeah, I'll start by, yeah. Go ahead, Petrina.
So I'm Petrina. I'm an artist, an organizer, and arts administrator. My practice considers how art can interrupt colonial legacies, which are subtle or invisible, but embedded within our socio-political and cultural systems. And I like to think that art can offer alternatives to redress these histories that are intimate and collaborative and community-led.
And I'm Marsya. I'm a curator, I'm an arts administrator. I've worked at a bunch of different institutions, but now I'm focusing on the collectives that I'm part of, which is Gendai, of course, as well as Younger Than Beyonce Gallery, which is part of a Gendai network of collectives also. So you'll hear about YTB, Younger Than Beyonce, shortly. I always work in collaboration with others, but also now I am just starting my PhD, which sounds so weird because it's not collaborative or not built to be collaborative, but I'm working with really great artists as my advisors to really talk about practices of collective care, radical friendship, and how these could be grounds for institutional structure, work culture, and labor practices, specifically in the arts.
And we're based in what's known as Toronto, and informed by our own roles and responsibilities. We're both racialized settlers and uninvited guests living, working, and learning on the territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. So we'd like to start with a quick list to illustrate some common conditions of labor in the arts based on our own experiences and what we've learned anecdotally from our peers. We'll make a note that most of our peers are based in Canada, but we know that these conditions extend to other countries around the world. And we're also hoping to hear from you on your own experiences. So we'd really like to open up after we go through our list to hear your personal experiences as well. And it's important to note that our list of common experiences, these toxic and precarious conditions are exacerbated for equity-seeking arts workers and are often compounded with racialized, misogynist, ableist, classist, ageist microaggressions, and outright violences. Marsya, do you want to start?
Sure. Okay. And these will not be new to you, but we thought we'll share them anyway as an invitation to also share maybe your experiences. Okay. One, contract positions only. One time an HR rep said to me on the last day of a temporary contract that has been renewed way too many times. Sorry, your job still has not been approved for a full-time position, but good news, we found a loophole that allows us to renew your contract temporarily once again. 2, minimum wage positions require several post-secondary degrees. 3, equivalent positions in other industries have higher salaries. 4, usually there's no health benefits, no pension, no performance reviews. 5, raises are unnecessary since your contract expires soon anyway.
6, being paid for a 30-hour work week while working a 40-hour week job. 7, lieu time instead of overtime pay. 8, no time to take deserved lieu time because of unrealistic workload and understaffed team. 9, if you leave your contract with weeks of untaken lieu time, everyone is surprised and claims that they just saw this for the first time. 10, staffs are so small, there is no one to cover your responsibilities if you're sick or out of office, but the show must go on.
11, you are always the only blank on staff. 12, if you are working on an offsite project, you will actually be the only staff of any position. 13, offices are all open concept and public facing with no privacy or anywhere to take breaks or eat food. 14, there is an established Canadian standard for minimum wage for independent artists. For example, the recommended minimum fee for a workshop is $316. This is, of course, the content is based on years of developing a practice, plus the hours to prepare for each specific presentation. 15, so mostly we get paid in exposure bucks.
16, getting a raise in title instead of a raise in pay. 17, not having a title or job description, so your responsibilities are never clear and your job never understood. 18, you're expected to attend openings or art events as social engagements, but really it's what other industries would call professional development. 19, therefore you will not get promoted or be offered new opportunities unless you attend these social engagements. 20, no transparency of salaries. We never know exactly what our colleagues are paid. The only thing we know for sure is that we are all underpaid.
21, no funding for staffing, but good news, we can double our production budget to make bigger exhibitions, festival, conferences, you name it. 22, your job is to monitor, program, or manage the gallery, but you will also clean toilets, wash dishes, move furniture, oversee pest control, etc., without additional pay. 23, huge wage gap, even though there's only like 5 staff members. 24, every single supervisor or director we've worked for has been white. 25, meanwhile, you will organize exhibitions and conferences about decolonization, inclusion, care, and labor issues.
So obviously this list does not cover everything. There have been, as of lately, a lot of open letters, testimonies, articles that have come out, especially in the context of the performativity of institutional Black Lives Matter solidarity statements. In Canada, called out public institutions include the Banff Centre, the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Gardner Museum, the Canadian Human Rights Museum, etc. And we're happy to share links with you about any of these open letters. And please feel free to share with us about kind of similar incidents that you know of in the US.
So now we're here at Gendai.
This is the context that we're responding
to. Sort of responding, sort of not really providing any answers. But Gendai is a collectively run nomadic nonprofits art organization. It was founded in 2000 and focused on experimental, curatorial, and organizational practices, especially supporting artists of color. So you'll see on the left some of the past programming that the Gendai team had done. Performances and feasts by artists Myung-Sun Kim and Lisa Myers as part of a year-long project called Gendai Kitchen. In this Gendai's like nomadic life, we also have a mobile unit. You'll see in the lower corner there, kind of this modular furniture that can be applied to really any kind of community presentation. So one of the applications was this community board at the Art of the Danforth Festival in 2014, where Gendai gave out free lemonade, but also uses like the mobile unit as a community board for anyone in the community to put up any postings. And then you'll see on the right, the request for proposals. Do you want a gallery complete with 20-year exhibition history and good standings with the public funding bodies? Apply today. This call was launched at the Toronto Biennial of Art. And so we applied. This is really true to Gendai's experimental approach to organizational practices. Because they wanted to retire, but instead of kind of closing the doors, they launched an open call to facilitate an organizational takeover.
But we didn't inherit any assets or funds. It's important to note.
It is what we inherited is there.
Archive.
20-year exhibition history and good standings with the public funding, which
but
really
also
helped.
Boxes of archive material that's in Marsya's garage.
Yes, we have not gone through them yet, but we will. So we proposed to pivot the Gendai platform to invest in the future, the futures of BIPOC arts workers and artists. We wanted to invest in our really peer development professionally and in response to the institutional labor conditions that we experience and experienced by our peers. So we offer two main projects right now in development, Gendai MA-MBA is ongoing. MA-MBA stands for Mastering the Art of Misguided Business Administration. And Gendai Co-op is in development, in research and development to be launched in 2021.
And Co-op is the program that we hope to develop for a New York context in collaboration with open source. Marsya, I like how in your notes here, you call them experimental professional development programs. I think that's really apropos.
Yeah, we're kind of experimenting, co-learning, but also trying to dismantle. It's a think tank. It's
and questioning what professionalism is,
yeah,
and how to become a professional or how to be a professional. Because we see a lot of ways that our current structures are not working, and we are trying to approach these issues as a creative practice, as artists and curator who are interested in making concrete, tangible change, but doing so in experimental ways.
Okay, so I'll share with you the Gendai MBA project. And I think Petrina sent the link.
Yep, in the chat.
Yeah, so that's a PDF, which includes our brief if you want to follow along, but we will be talking about kind of the main points here. Basically out of a need, out of like this embodied need to turn away from institutional spaces. We retreated into our own support systems and found comfort and strength in our collective spaces. So this is our first project. It really focuses on DIY collectives. We produced like a 10-month workshop series. We developed a 10-month workshop series that seeks to improve capacity building amongst visual arts collectives with majority racialized membership. We want to address the sector-wide challenges of precarity and isolation. This project is aimed at creating a network, a support network for collectives to resource share, to co-learn, to collaborate, and improve workplace sustainability. The workshops are designed to respond to our shared needs and will include topics such as financial planning, conflict resolution, anti-oppression training, etc. So yeah, this is basically an investment in racialized arts practitioners as the next generation of cultural leaders, radical thinkers, and visionaries who offer new pathways towards more equitable futures.
And some of the goals of MA MBA is to learn the landscape of collective work locally and to sustain DIY culture through methodologies of care and interdependency. We really think about MA MBA as a think tank where we're bringing together 8 diverse collectives to consider like how to move forward in ways that are more sustainable and don't replicate the harm that currently institutions force upon BIPOC practitioners. And we seek to offer our partner collectives the funds, space, time, and tools to conceptualize, develop, and improve upon their own organizational model and their own infrastructural health, and to create solutions unique to their specific contexts, methodologies, needs, and future ambitions. And MA/MBA seeks to move away from hierarchies of patriarchal, colonial, and capitalist values, and instead build a horizontal DIY network that encourages co-learning and co-mentorship through an accessible framework. And to that end, each collective is paid to attend our workshop sessions because we're asking for their time and to share their experiences. And in other industries, it's standard to be paid for training and paid for professional development. And we try to create a non-hierarchy space by paying both the facilitators of the workshops and the participants equally.
Yeah, because this really came out of a conversation that we've been having between local collectives. It's kind of facilitated. We've listed our references here, like some of the folks that really inspired us. Good School Ecosystem in Jakarta has been like really vital in starting these conversations here in Toronto. When I went to visit them, I was really struck with like how they created this supportive ecosystem. They kind of joined forces between 3 different collectives and they shared everything, all of their resources, created this art space that's really a community space, really vibrant, and created a different kind of institution. So they came here as part of a residency, and we started talking to different collectives. And what came out is that like many of these collectives are sharing the same problems, the same challenges. We're all working within the same funding systems. So we all experience difficulty securing sustainable funding, sustainable space, support, and this led to challenges in practicing healthy labor conditions. Where collective spaces feel super different than institutional spaces, but ultimately there are still precarious labor conditions because of this lack of resources. So, and of course, these barriers are magnified for artists from marginalized communities. The impacts are exacerbated when considering how exploitative operational practices proliferate across cultural institutions, despite a significant rise in public-facing programming that talks all about commitments to decolonization, inclusion, and care. Another challenges we share is that many of these collectives have worked with large institutions in kind of a relationship that seems transactional. We're kind of invited to come in to supply diverse or community programming, but these collaborations are unequal, short-term, they provide minimal budgets, and ultimately funding from granting agencies and institutions only support programming and public-facing stuff without any consideration for operational costs. So yeah, these are kind of like some of the things that came up during our conversations. And so we invited some of these non-hierarchical art collectives who mostly represent and serve racialized communities. We wanted to gather and discuss these issues and how we can kind of address them together, be kind of stronger by coming together instead of competing for the same pool of institutions and funding.
So the first cohort, our inaugural 2020-2021 cohort, we gathered and determined some of the issues that we'd like to address. And we invited industry professionals with specialized working knowledges on the topics to facilitate monthly sessions. And we were really interested in facilitators that came from, quote unquote, expertise, professional expertise, but also we have been seeking out facilitators that are interested in addressing the limitations of current practices and reimagining what more equitable approaches can look like. Originally, MA-MBA started with a grant of 30,000 Canadian, so a little less in American funds, from the Toronto Arts Council. But this was far from what we needed. And this month we secured an additional 25,000 from the Ontario Arts Council. This allows us to add a few more workshops to our original 10-month series, increase facilitation fees. We had originally budgeted for the arts industry standard fee of $316. But very quickly learned that beyond the arts, this is not the standard in other industries. And as well, to increase each collective's fee for their time in co-learning with us. And then another important part of MA-MBA's budget is that we've allocated an amount for each collective to put towards their own operational and capacity building needs. So for example, like purchasing software or memberships or accessing other kinds of training. All of the 8 collectives that we're working with are all very diverse. So some of them operate public spaces, some of them don't, some of them are publishers or operate digitally. Each collective had different needs that wouldn't be addressed by a shared workshop series. So that additional money goes to each collective for them to embark on their own learning and trainings. And we recognize that these types of trainings and mentorships are often part of institutional working experiences. Institutional workers will often get training in things like financial literacy or accessibility training. And these are trainings that are often very expensive and inaccessible to DIY collectives. So that's part of the thinking behind like trying to fill the gaps of what our own knowledges were around these topics. And as well trying to dismantle the secrecy and competitive nature of our sector, and instead, experimenting in how we can be a stronger sector by working together and supporting each other.
And on that note, I think after working with some collectives, we are finding more strength to start tackling institutions. So working with institutions, friendly institutions to start with. So we developed co-op, and this program is a co-opting of existing practices of many different practices, including a touring curatorial project, a research residency, an institutional audit, a cultural consultancy process, as well as the cooperative model, and a student co-op kind of internship program. Currently, we're in research and development. We're supported by the Ontario Arts Council. The reason why we're embarking on this, is because of what we mentioned before, the roles of museum professionals derived from colonial roots and museology, and thereby centered around the acquisitions of safekeeping of objects. So these priorities are often achieved at the cost of the well-being of artists, coordinators, technicians, assistants, volunteers, and other support staff. So Gendai Co-op is asking if institutions are committed to decolonizing, as they all say they do, shouldn't we pivot from approaches that value consumption and display of objects over the care of peoples? So we're really responding to how the physical, intellectual, and emotional labor, especially from marginalized groups, is exploited throughout the global economy, and how our institutions replicate the same dynamics. Racialized artists and their bodies and their work are instrumentalized for optics and performative allyship. By reframing Gendai's mandate to support artists of color, we are imagining curatorial practice as a form of care for our peers, for our collaborators, for our communities.
And so co-op, we imagine to be this really flexible and responsive program. And so it can take many forms. It's a touring curatorial project where host institutions will become a part of a cohort of institutions who are interested in taking concrete steps towards more equitable practice. And we ask each host institution to contribute a small percentage of their annual operating budget towards a collective fund that supports the cost of the entire cohort. And this was really inspired by the wage certification system, which is very different than the artist fee recommender system that we have in Canada, that's proportional to an institution's annual operating budget. And this was really important because we wanted to move away from the traditional transactional approaches that cultural consultancy currently utilizes, where the consultant is hired by a board. So they have already replicated this very top-down power dynamic. And when the consultant comes with their findings, the board or the executive team is not obligated to share any of the consultancy's findings or be selective in what they share. So it was really important for us when developing co-op to think about ways of alternative funding and ways that we're moving away from, being a program that only certain institutions can afford, for example. And co-op is also sort of like a research residency that focuses on introspective activities. So we are basically inviting ourselves as Gendai into residence at these host institutions, and we'll be conducting internal activities such as ongoing meetings with staff and board to gain insight into the operational structure, division of labor, and lived experiences of those working for and with the institution. We're interested in organizing social and visioning activities to build trust and allyship between BIPOC staff. So really thinking about how a network that goes beyond an individual institution, but instead reaches across institutions so that institutions can support and help each other through this process. And we're also planning to analyze institutional policies, programs, and assets from a decolonial perspective, and to offer BIPOC mentorship for interns and entry-level staff. And we also see Gendai Co-op as an institutional audit, and we'll encourage institutions to determine their own goals to improve equity based on our research and our compiled recommendations, addressing areas such as hiring and board appointment practices, onboarding training, artists and employee contracts, paid mentorship, internship opportunities, diverse community representation and governance, reporting and accountability dynamics, and policy or bylaw analysis and development.
Some of our deliverables include a Gendai Co-op certificate of cooperation, which is contingent upon the host institution's commitment to continuing to work together. This certification requires renewal and will expire without institutional progress and cooperation. 2, the Gendai and host institution will agree upon a list of equity-focused goals and a timeline for achieving these goals. 3, a publicly accessible summary of research activities, findings, and recommendations for the entire cohort. So the reason we make this into a cohort system is to address this kind of issues as a sector-wide issue and not just to call out and singling out institutions. I feel, as much as it's been helpful as a start, I feel like in order to take further steps forward, our intention is not to shame, but to shift our thinking into understanding the issues as a sector-wide issue. And how do we address it collectively? We also have a very important terms and conditions as part of our co-op, the asterisk part. Gendai Co-op co-ops a variety of professional services that are generally retained by cultural institutions, including financial audits, cultural planning consultations, diversity and inclusion training, etc. But we offer these services for the low price of curatorial and artistic labor, as well as the experimental competency level of such professions. While wildly innovative and ambitious and potentially utopic, please take note of Gendai Co-op's limitations, surface limitations. Gendai Co-op is not a professional diversity and inclusion training program for your staff. Gendai Co-op is not counseling for your BIPOC operatives. Gendai Co-op cooperators, us, are not certified conflict mediation professionals. However, Gendai Co-op cooperators are excited to cooperate with you as co-researchers, co-learners, experimenting with alternative forms of operations. And we will work together to connect you with appropriate professional help and resources if necessary. Gendai Co-op terms and conditions may apply.
So we're excited to launch our inaugural Toronto-based cohort in the fall of 2021. Currently, we have 5 institutions who will be part of the inaugural cohort, a municipal art gallery, 2 artist-run centers, a university student-run gallery, and we're going to begin by also doing a self-audit on Gendai and our own organizational histories, bylaws, policies, as well as shortcomings.
We're also always open for collaborators. Gendai, MBA, and Co-op really work towards some big dreams. These are kind of our long-term research interests. We want to look into universal basic income for artists and arts workers. We want to look into labor union for artists and arts workers, sector transparency, salaries, artist fees, contracts, etc. Experimenting with structures of funding, alternatives to institutions and professionalism, alternative approaches to HR management, job sharing models, alternative labor structures, addressing the precarity of the current conditions, and collective and decolonial practices. So if anyone's interested, if you know anyone who's interested, please always reach out.
And so we thought that we would kind of open it up to the group to hear about some of your experiences. We have a list of questions for you about your own kind of workings in collective capacities, or your own experiences working with institutions. We're here to sort of learn about the New York context as well. And we hope to work with Open Source's staff and board to continue to think about how these models could be applied to a local context.
Thank you. So I already, so I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about what we have been really pushing for and where we think we also are very aware and think that we made a big step, but now made a big step backwards again. So that would be wage. We were definitely wage certified last year, and we are still trying to go with the plan, I think, but now because we are financially doing much worse than we did last year, we had to step back on some of the payments that we were doing previously for performers, and we're still going through it with the artists that we have, but we are not doing it really correctly. So I mean, that is always the big problem, right? I mean, we might, even if we might have our mindset and our hearts there, we don't really have the finances to make it work, right? And that's, I think, where the first step is. Where the problem is, how do we here in this country, how can we actually manage to get these fundings? And we do, I think, more than you probably, I don't know exactly how it works, but we do a lot of personal fundraising too, which is where the board is actually very involved in, and we are now, right now, actually in this step next, and now we are fundraising. And there's always, I mean, that's basically we're asking the artists to help us. They are giving us work for free. I mean, it's definitely not exactly how the arts world should work, right? But
there is a similar issue in small galleries in Toronto where there are many auctions where small spaces are auctioning off artists' work. But the galleries will often have to pay for the printing and framing of the work because the artists aren't able to. And so it really cuts into what the gallery is able to fundraise from these events because they're spending all of their revenue on the printing and framing. Right. So I do know that some of the auctions, will only come up with a couple $100 after, hours and hours of work from the staff and the board and the artists to put on this huge auction event, and they don't make very much money.
I mean, it's amazing, and that is something that I have to say about New York, especially, that there is an amazing support because fundraising is such a huge part of these smaller arts organizations and also the bigger ones, actually. there is also a huge support by the community, right? It's like there is definitely a lot of people giving. And I mean, I'm from Europe, and there that culture doesn't exist. I don't know, like that's, for example, there is not really much. They are much more dependent on the funding from the government.
Same in Canada. We don't have a huge market for collecting artworks. So we all heavily rely on government funding as well. All of Gendai is so far funded by government grants.
We've also
thinking
that,
back.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention, thinking about the fundraiser and the donating of art, that's kind of the reason that we're not really able to do Wage this year, is because a lot of artists decided to volunteer their time and resources to keep programming at the gallery running, rather than getting paid. And like people would rather volunteer to keep things running rather than stick to Wage, because we wouldn't be able to do that in that case.
Which probably is a little different, right? If it's, yeah. But still, it's a problem.
Yeah, so that's maybe the limitations. But that's, going forward, hopefully we won't, have those limitations of 2020 in the future. But it's kind of a weird situation. But yeah, we've kept our, for exhibitions, we've definitely kept to Wage, but otherwise it's been tougher.
No, it's challenging. Marsya and I recently gave a talk about labor conditions in the arts. And it was for a conference about labor conditions. And we were paid $25 each for our presentation. And
as an exception.
As an exception, we had to say that we were low income to receive the $25. And this was a conference put on by an enormous institution that, has millions of dollars in assets and salary, pays millions of dollars in salaries. So it's definitely, it's unfortunate that the kind of point of conflict is at the very, very bottom of these enormous hierarchies, when really there are much bigger issues at the top.
So and one thing that I think we are struggling a lot with, we are not struggling so much with a diverse programming. That is something that is very, we are more struggling with with the diversity on our board. We are struggling with the diversity of our audience. So more than non-paid audience or helpers and involvement, that's where we're struggling actually the most with the diversity.
Yeah, especially also I think that's the issue with working boards. I'm part of a board here too, for an organization that focuses on South Asian visual arts. And it's been kind of challenging to retain board members for long-term positions, and maintain kind of or at least transfer of information. But in a sense that, boards are unpaid positions. And where did the position of the role of boards in the first place came from a certain kind of legacy, a certain history that also doesn't allow it to be paid. And when this kind of limitation is put on, it also limits who has the luxury of coming in and participating. And I think a lot of collectives also work this way in terms of like it's better to keep the doors open than say like maintaining Carfax standards and or things like that. And especially, for example, for Younger Than Beyonce, what we did is that we were always applying for grants, and we put on like, we work with 100 artists in a year. Our budget was, this is going to sound crazy, but I think it was like $20,000 or something. But we met the, we didn't have to pay for space because we got it sponsored by a condo developer company. So there's that. But also, we always met Carfax. We always paid artists. And then what ended up happening is that we never paid ourselves. So it was after a year of really successful programming, a year and a half, more than a year, we were always invited to, we partnered with huge institutions after that because we were really prolific and we were really doing a lot of stuff. We were bringing emerging artists into our spaces, and this became like a one-stop shop almost for major institutions to get their diverse programming, to get their emerging artist quota by asking us to curate. So we've programmed, we worked with a lot of institutions, but the funding came only for the artists. And then after a year and a half, we were burned out for another year and a half, and now are just starting to resurface by doing operational research and studying with Good School and MA MBA. So that's also why we started thinking about labor conditions, because
it also points to a problem of how we measure success. Like all of funders, they measure success by how many bodies you can, well, now virtual bodies you can put into a room for public programming. And that's just, one kind of service that museums, art organizations, nonprofits, that's just one way of serving a community. But it seems to be the only way that we know how to measure what success is. And it's the only way that funders can almost like monetize success. And that's why you have institutions who are only interested in supporting public facing programming, funders that only support public programming. But unless you are, a mega institution with millions of dollars of revenue coming in, it doesn't leave any support for operational costs, as well as investing in your staff and board as humans.
But yeah, this is like also widespread, which is why we wanted a cohort of collectives and we want a cohort of institutions, because there are these issues that are just so embedded in the sector that we feel like once we come together, then we start seeing how to undo them.
And it can feel, I think, overwhelming to try to feel the weight of dismantling, hundreds of years of history in your sector as just like a small organization that has, like open source, just like a few staff members. And so the idea of collectivity is extended into thinking about these cohorts, to think about the issues that the sector is having beyond just singular institutions. And also being a source of support for each other, I think is really important, because related to the kind of secrecy and competition kind of nature of our sector, how we're all competing for the same funding opportunities, we think that there's a lot to gain from seeing each other as collaborators and co-conspirators, as opposed to competition for grants. And in the case of MA MBA, the idea of pooling together all of our output and all of our programming helps to put these small organizations and small collectives on par with providing the amount of public programming that a large institution would. And So we see that as a way as well to find a way to access more larger pots of funding and more funding that's long-term, multi-year funding. But we're not there yet, but that's our future dream, is to build a network of small organizations so that we can think about sustainability long-term together. The way that large institutions already do. They're already securing, multi-year funding and able to plan many years in advance. So that's one of our goals for the MA MBA cohort. As well, we should mention that we're also currently developing other forms of MA MBA and co-op in other spaces and in other communities. Currently, we're developing a youth-focused MA MBA in collaboration with a foundation in Western Canada. And the idea is to start an even earlier investment into aspiring arts workers, teens and youth who are interested in community building and would benefit from an introduction to what collective work can look like and what equity building can look like. So we're really
also thinking like what they have to say and like what they want to see in the institution, in their institutions. Yeah.
And bringing the two programs together, the goals that our Toronto cohort of co-op, they'll create their own equity goals. And then these goals are going to be approved or like looked over by our MA MBA cohort of collectives, but as well as our youth collective as well. Which kind of flips that power dynamic to give some of these like emerging workings of public institutions. So we also see the two programs as kind of working hand in hand with each other as well.
What do you all think? Like, do you see this happening?
Are there any problems that you feel are specific to New York or the US that maybe we didn't touch upon because the contexts are a little bit different?
I think that the biggest problem is, like you said, the money. I think that's something that certainly, where does it come from? How and then obviously, yeah, I'm super interested in really going through this and working with you on that. I think it sounds really, really interesting to me. I just wanted to excuse myself for a second because I have to just move to the gallery. I made Anna a host. And in case, but I'm still listening and I just have to I'm going to be back in 2 minutes.
Yeah,
I have some questions. So I guess I'm a little lost, and I think I'm lost because maybe it's you're in a different country, or I don't know what it is, but I guess I don't understand what kind of commitment you're asking of these organizations, how all the organizations would communicate with each other, and what kind of standards you're expecting, as sort of a part 2 of the commitment, because you said that you're going to review each organization and each year. And so what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like I like I said, I guess I'm a little bit lost in like what our commitment would be and what we would get, like sort of practical, the practical side of things.
Yeah, that's the great question. I mean, as part of the experimental nature of this, this is also kind of the strength or the advantage is that, you know, we're flexible. But much like MBA, for example, with MBA, the syllabus of the program is created by the collective members. So collective members identify what they need to learn and what they want to think about. And we created the syllabus based on that. So it is kind of the same approach that we're approaching co-op, is that the idea is that the institutions are defining for themselves what they want to work on, and we'll help them identify these needs by you know talking they just understanding the institutions on a kind of on the ground level, by doing these operational residencies, and also with MBA, for example, the each collective kind of sends a delegate, one or two every month, to meet with the rest of the collectives to study the program. So for example, the next MBA class is November 26th. And we'll be looking at how accessibility framework is useful in building an operational, building an institution's operational structure, as opposed to only physical aspects of an institution. So yeah, so like a member of each of the 9 collectives will come, will kind of brainstorm together with facilitation from an access and disability justice practitioner. And then each one of us will come back to our own collective and kind of share what we all learned. So yeah, and I think by creating this meeting spot where everyone's paid, of course, we also share each other's conditions, and by sharing and the stories of our respective collectives, we start seeing what needs to happen. So we envision this kind of approach could also happen for co-op, regular meetings between co-op members, knowledge sharing, story sharing, skill sharing, peer evaluations, really like we're going to be coming up with the goal. Each institution is going to come up with their own goals, but we're also going to talk it out with each other, and understanding each other as a resource. It's of course like it's supposed to be a supportive space to develop, and we're all invested in each other's kind of progress within this equity issue. So yeah, so that's kind of, it's kind of like putting institutions in school.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, we would be paid to say to you all, okay, this is what we want to focus on. This is like the problem that we want to address, or, you know, the issue that we want to, you know, work on. And that you all would send sort of like coaches, I guess you could call them. You know, I don't know. And they would check in with us like regularly and say, okay, have you hit this post, this, you know, this milestone? And then after a certain amount of time, then you reevaluate our goal. Is that right?
I think the entire.
You know what I kind of feel like I'm like changing the conversation, and I really don't mean to. So forgive me if that's what I'm doing, you know, that's what I'm doing.
No, this is great. I mean, it's kind of, yeah, I think the way we envision it so far is for the co-op year is focused on developing the goals themselves. And that's really kind of dependent on a really introspective look at the organizations.
And having honest conversations with other organizations about what their issues are, and kind of brainstorming together ways to address some of these issues. Like Monica already mentioned like diversity or equity on board and in audiences. Like those are two things that, you know, we can collectively brainstorm how to improve. And of course, like, you know, these improvements don't happen like overnight. It's not, there's not like an end kind of date or deadline. But the idea is that the year is like a way to set aside the time and resources to start thinking about these things with our colleagues and with our peers, and to try and work towards some concrete goals to work towards in the future.
So you would be putting us also during this process in touch with other organizations like-minded galleries around the world. And we would say, okay, the issue is board diversity, and then everybody would discuss what kind of efforts worked, what didn't work. Is that what you do? Or you guys tell us, like you're talking to each organization individually, and then you say to us, like, okay, here's what worked in Hong Kong.
Would be connected with other New York organizations that would be familiar with the local kind of contacts and local challenges to the work that you're doing. And possibilities. But we also see kind of different cohorts being able to connect with each other, but that probably would make sense for that to be like as ongoing or as frequent as kind of trying to problem solve your own kind of local ecosystem.
And in terms of the money, we want for MMBA, we wanted each collective to be paid to be. The issue of collective organizing is there are no operational funding, so there's no time dedicated to thinking operationally and strategically kind of address those issues.
So we would essentially get paid, and then like a year from now, we would be contributing to pay for someone else to come in. Is that right? Is that
for
the
the co-op?
structure?
It will be a bit different because then we'll work in institutions that have operational funding. So we're kind of borrowing from the wage certification system, where it's like a percentage of an institution's operational budget that you'd have to contribute. For example, we're also cognizant of the issue that diversity consultants or consultants in general face in institutions is that what we're hearing is that consultants would be hired by institution to kind of address an issue, but then there's a commission of that institution. So it's hard to kind of track accountability and kind of be honest, etc., or really having difficult conversations.
That's a good point.
Welcome back. So we're borrowing from Good School. Good School is a collective of collectives, including there's three: Serum, Grafi Suruhara, and Ruang Rupa. And they are implementing this idea of a collective pot called Lumbung, which they are implementing in Documenta, because Ruang Rupa is the artistic directors of the next Documenta. And we're borrowing from them this idea of a collective pot, where you kind of pool your resources and redistribute as needed. So then if you are paired up with a much more with an organization with an organization that has much more resources, then they also contribute more than you would.
It's like sliding scale basis.
Yeah.
So it's like we give up 1%. Everyone gives up 1% of, let's just say, of their income for the year. And so if you're at Guggenheim, that's going to be a lot more than if you are open source.
Yeah. that's kind of the we want to test. For the Toronto or cohort, we are also applying for funding that is for Canada sector-wide strategies and initiatives.
It's called sector innovation.
Yeah. And yeah, Shauna has also been looking into grants for possible New York cohort. So yeah, we're looking into these kind of options so that it's not an instant commissioning directly. Really an institution investing in a cohort system.
Yeah, I like that.
And we're
Yeah.
also
You're right. Bias.
Mhm.
If we are hiring you to tell us what with us, right? That's
I'll give you the emperor.
wrong. Yeah, that's inherently wrong. You're right. Yeah, that's so smart.
Also looking to think about how the ways that institutions can participate is not determined by how much budget that they have. So for our Toronto cohort, if our grant is successful, the grant will basically for the program to happen, and institutions are only fund the kind of public out of the program. So whether it's like a publication or like a town hall, something to kind of like present work together. But we really hope that we're trying to think outside the box in terms of how to fund this program. And we're relying on, local practitioners to tell us about their sector. So currently for the Toronto-based cohort, we have a redevelopment grant from the Ontario Arts Councils where we're a number of Canadian arts practitioners from the country who are BIPOC and have worked with or for institutions. And so we're really relying on practitioners in the field to kind of help us learn about the local context of your own sector. Thanks for those links, Shauna. We'll check them out.
Yeah, it's because I was just thinking too, I'm really excited to work with Gendai because it's like we're part of DBAA, which is great in connecting, but there's not really a force behind it to push us to address some things. And NOCDNY, we've connected with them a little bit. The limitations there are what you've been describing is like we don't really have the money, the staff, or the time to devote to a lot of this stuff. So I mean, what we do is set aside some of them, and so it would be great to work a little bit more, be a little bit more accountable to another organization too, rather than working on our own. That's when we sort of fall behind on that, right?
And it's isolating to work on your own to try to be like, okay, I have to like save my institution. What can I do? When really it's, each institution is just like one piece of a big sector that we all owns. That's part of the idea about co-op, is that we're all part of, this is our that needs kind of our help.
What kind of time commitment are you? I'm also so really engaged in what you have to say. I think that my questions are more practical, what would you need for goal is, I don't know. I guess I'm looking for structure, I think, and that's sort of the point is that
I think there will be a structure. It's just not quite yet determined because we haven't figured out, like you were saying, like what our limitations are and what our capacity is. So I think we're kind of going to take the next maybe half a year to kind of work through what a more formalized structure can be. And then maybe we'll present again to maybe we'll have another Zoom to present kind of what we propose a structure would be for the 2021-2022 year can be.
Yeah.
or just like a proposal for open source, like this is for you. I don't
Yeah,
know. Maybe that
absolutely.
would help.
We are doing so when we're developing our cohort, we have this application form for any institutions interested in joining. And the goal of this application form is, as much as it's also a tongue-in-cheek response to the art sector, it's also to see what is feasible for each institution and to select, to kind of create a cohort that responds to needs and the challenges and the limits of each institution. Because we decided to do a monthly meeting for the MA/MBA cohort because it was what the MA/MBA group felt was feasible. So yeah, it seems definitely challenges in kind of operating via a consensus model, but we also view it as part of the experiment. What is it like to operate on a consensus basis? If we want to experiment with non-hierarchy, then like what is the time commitment for that and the frustration that's involved in that? And is it worth it? What is worth it and what's not worth it?
And it helps that we're borrowing this kind of like curatorial practice, artistic production. We're kind of straddling these different categories. It's helpful because arts institutions are used to funding artist projects and used to giving artists and curators creative control and retain authorship in their work. It's the way that institutions are used to supporting collaborators. So we're sort of trying to borrow different strengths of different ways that people already work with institutions, but trying to kind of like harness the power of those relationships and use them to look internally into the institution itself. We don't want to take up too much more of your time. We're already well over the hour suggested.
But super appreciative of
yeah,
those
they're
questions,
really great.
helping us think through.
We really look forward to working with open source to kind of think about possibilities together. And please feel free to reach out to us directly. We love talking about this stuff and would love to continue the conversation.
Yeah, this is really great. We're really excited to, one, excited for your show next year, but two, excited to work with Gendai.
We hope we can come to New York.
Yeah.
We hope that the border is open.
Yeah. Monica, you're muted.
I feel like especially now this is super, to get back to this, just now that we are like starting basically from the beginning again in some ways, right? To build it up kind of, in a maybe with a different mindset or with some help to actually, I think that would be really, really amazing. I'm just gonna put in the chat, like just in the way we have the show right now and I just opened it up by Stephanie Dinkins, where you can also participate remotely. And so if anybody wants to just participate here and kind of like give a quick snippet of and answer that question. Geza was here in person, I think, yesterday, right, with your kids? But that would be great. And well, and thank you, Petrina and Marsya, so much for doing this. It's really amazing. And you will get paid for this.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Bye, everyone. Everybody's waking up for me.
Yeah, be in
Bye.
touch.
Thanks.
The questions, just let us know. It'll help us brainstorm and
Okay, will do.
develop. Awesome.
Yeah,
Nice to
thank
meet
you.
all.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.